I'm Eleanor, 32 years old, standing in the ruins of what used to be my grandmother's antique shop, the one Grandpa Charles left to me in his will. Shattered glass crunches beneath my feet as I survey the destruction, priceless heirlooms smashed, furniture overturned, and decades of family history deliberately destroyed. My own mother did this, all because I refused to sign over my inheritance to my golden child brother Brian. What hurts most isn't the property damage, but realizing that blood loyalty means nothing when family wants what you have. If you're watching this right now, I'd love to know where you're from. This journey through family betrayal taught me that support can come from unexpected places. Take a second to hit that like button if you've ever stood your ground against family pressure, and subscribe to join our community of survivors who refuse to be victims. My story might be tough to hear, but I promise, there's light at the end of this dark family tunnel. My earliest memories of Grandpa Charles are filled with the scent of lemon oil polish and the gentle tinkling of antique clocks striking the hour in perfect harmony. From the age of 8, every Saturday was sacred. It was our day together at Timeless Treasures, the antique shop he'd built from nothing into the most respected establishment in Millfield. "Ellie," he'd say, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "each piece has a story. Our job isn't just to sell antiques, it's to be the custodians of history." He'd lift me up to see inside a grandfather clock's mechanism or let me carefully hold a Victorian brooch, teaching me not just about the objects but about patience and appreciation. My brother Brian, 2 years older than me, was invited to these Saturday excursions too, but he rarely came. "Why would I want to waste my weekend looking at old junk?" he'd say, preferring to practice baseball or hang out with friends. My parents, Margaret and Thomas, never pushed him to join. "Brian's a natural athlete," my mother would say proudly. "He needs to focus on what he's good at." The subtext was clear. I wasn't good at anything that mattered to them. I wasn't the star athlete bringing home trophies. I wasn't the social butterfly with dozens of friends. I was the boring bookish one who preferred the company of old things and older people. But with Grandpa, I never felt less than. With him, my careful nature was a strength, not a deficiency. By the time I was 15, Grandpa was teaching me restoration techniques. "You have steady hands, Ellie," he'd compliment me as I carefully reattached the delicate handle on a Limoges teacup. "And a good eye." He taught me to spot the difference between an authentic antique and a clever reproduction, to recognize the distinctive styles of different eras, to understand the mechanics of everything from watches to writing desks. Through high school and then college at the State University 20 miles away, I kept up our Saturday tradition. While Brian became the football star my parents bragged about at every opportunity, I was quietly learning the business side of the antique world. Grandpa taught me about auctions, pricing strategies, insurance values, and customer relations. "Knowledge is your advantage," he'd say. "Never stop learning." During my senior year of college, when I was majoring in business with a minor in art history, Grandpa's health began to decline. Arthritis made his once deft fingers stiff and painful. His eyesight, so crucial for examining details, started to fail him. Without making a big deal of it, I began taking on more responsibilities at the shop. I'd drive him to estate sales and be his eyes, describing pieces in detail. I'd handle the heavy lifting that had become too much for him. I created a computer inventory system to replace his meticulous but aging paper ledgers. My parents rarely visited the shop. My father Thomas was too busy with his insurance agency, and my mother Margaret considered antiques dust collectors. When they did stop by, it was usually to pressure Grandpa into selling some piece or another for Brian's benefit. Money for a training camp, for his first car, for his college tuition when his sports scholarship fell through after a knee injury. "Why doesn't Eleanor ever ask for anything?" Grandpa once asked them pointedly after they suggested he sell a valuable colonial-era cabinet to fund Brian's spring break trip. "Oh, she's always been self-sufficient," my mother said dismissively, as if my independence was somehow less commendable than Brian's constant needs. The last 2 years of Grandpa's life, I practically lived at his house, coming directly from my entry-level museum job to care for him in the evenings. The shop was only open weekends by then, but He insisted on still going in, sitting in his favorite chair by the register, greeting longtime customers and telling stories about his favorite pieces. "I worry about what will happen to all of this," he confided in me one evening, gesturing around the shop with a trembling hand. We were alone, doing inventory after closing. "This isn't just merchandise, Sally. It's our family history." He wasn't exaggerating. Many of the most precious items in the shop had been in our family for generations. The shop contained everything from my great-great-grandmother's wedding china to Civil War letters written by my ancestors. Grandpa had built the commercial part of the business around this core of family treasures, adding pieces that complemented our history. "The shop will be fine," I assured him, though I shared his concerns. I'd overheard my parents discussing how they could finally sell off all that old stuff when the time came, treating the collection as nothing but potential cash. A week before he passed away, Grandpa had a moment of startling clarity after days of confusion. "Ellie," he said, taking my hand with surprising strength, "promise me you'll protect our history." "I promise," I told him, fighting back tears. "They don't understand," he said, and I knew he meant my parents and Brian. "They see dollar signs, not stories. But you see both. That's why it has to be you." I didn't fully understand what he meant until the will was read. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and hollow condolences. I moved through it like a sleepwalker, accepting hugs from distant relatives who had rarely bothered to visit Grandpa when he was alive. My parents managed the arrangements with efficient detachment, more concerned with appearances than genuine mourning. Brian showed up late, slipping into the back row midway through the service, smelling faintly of alcohol despite the early hour. 3 days later, we gathered in the wood-paneled office of Mr. Winters, the family lawyer who had handled Grandpa's affairs for decades. My parents sat ramrod straight in their chairs, expressions solemn but expectant. Brian slouched beside them, scrolling through his phone until my mother nudged him sharply. "Before I begin, Mr. Winters said, adjusting his glasses, "Charles wanted me to express that his decisions were made with great deliberation and clear mind." He looked directly at me as he said this, and something in his expression made me sit up straighter. The room fell completely silent as Mr. Winters read the will. When he announced that timeless treasures, both the business and the historic building it occupied in downtown Millfield, valued at approximately $1.2 million, was bequeathed solely to me, along with $300,000 in savings, the silence shattered. "What the hell?" Brian exploded, jumping to his feet. "That's not possible." My father's face had gone rigid, while my mother's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish out of water. "There must be some mistake," my father finally said, his voice dangerously controlled. Mr. Winters shook his head. "There's no mistake. Charles was very specific." Brian pointed at me accusingly. "You manipulated him. Taking advantage of a sick old man. That's enough," Mr. Winters cut in firmly. "Charles amended his will 2 years ago, when he was of completely sound mind. He was explicit about his reasons." "Which were?" my mother demanded. Mr. Winters consulted the document. He states, "To my granddaughter Eleanor, who has shown true appreciation for our family's history and dedicated herself to learning every aspect of the business, I leave timeless treasures and its entire inventory, along with the building at 423 Main Street and my personal savings. She alone has demonstrated both the knowledge and the love necessary to be the custodian of our family's legacy." Brian kicked the small table between the chairs, sending a crystal paperweight crashing to the floor. "This is bullshit. I'm his grandson, too." My parents requested a private moment with Mr. Winters, practically pushing me and Brian out into the hallway. Through the door, I could hear their urgent, angry whispers, though not the specific words. Brian paced the hallway like a caged animal. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Playing the devoted granddaughter, while the rest of us had lives. This was your plan all along." "There was no plan," I said, still in shock myself. "I had no idea he was going to do this." "Right," he sneered. "You just happened to be there every time he turned around, making sure he remembered who his favorite was." The door opened before I could respond, and my parents emerged, their faces composed but eyes cold. "We'll discuss this at home," my father said in the tone that had always ended arguments when we were children. The drive back to my apartment was silent and tense. Once inside, my mother didn't even wait to remove her coat before rounding on me. "You need to do the right thing here, Eleanor," she said. "This inheritance should be split evenly." "That wasn't what Grandpa wanted," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly," my father interjected. "He was old, in pain, and you were the one who was there all the time." "Because none of you were," I shot back, a lifetime of resentment bubbling to the surface. "You treated the shop like it was an embarrassment." Brian called his collection junk. "Why would Grandpa leave it to people who never valued it?" My father switched tactics, his insurance salesman persona taking over. "Eleanor, be reasonable. We're talking about family equality here. Brian has his landscaping business, but it's struggling. He has 2 kids to support. This inheritance could secure their future." "And what about my future?" I asked. "I've put years into learning the business. I've helped run it. I know what every piece means and where it came from." "It's just old furniture," my mother dismissed. "It can be sold anywhere. Brian needs actual capital to grow his business." Something clicked into place. "You were counting on this," I realized aloud. "You were expecting Grandpa's money to bail Brian out." My parents exchanged a glance that confirmed my suspicion. "Your brother has had some financial setbacks," my father admitted reluctantly. "This inheritance would help him get back on his feet." "What kind of setbacks?" I pressed. Neither answered directly, but my mother's face tightened. "Family helps family, Eleanor. Your grandfather would have wanted to help his grandson if he'd known the full situation." "Then why didn't you tell him the full situation while he was alive?" I challenged. "We were handling it," my father said stiffly. "We didn't want to worry him during his illness." They left shortly after, my mother's parting words hanging in the air. "Think about what's right, Eleanor. Think about your family." The next morning, I met with Sandra, Grandpa's longtime shop assistant who had become a friend. Over coffee in the quiet shop, she filled in the blanks my family had left. "Brian's in deep with gambling debts," she told me, her voice low though we were alone. "Your parents have bailed him out twice already. Your dad nearly drained his retirement fund last time. Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked. Sandra gave me a sad smile. "Charles knew. He didn't want to burden you with it, but it's partly why he left everything to you. He said, 'If I leave it to the others, everything I've built will be gone in 6 months.'" As the reality of the situation settled over me, I made a decision. I would honor Grandpa's wishes. The shop, our family's legacy, would not be sacrificed to cover my brother's gambling debts. I just didn't realize then how high the cost of that decision would be. The campaign began with phone calls, daily, relentless, from both parents in rotation. Sometimes they tried reason. "We just want what's fair for everyone." Sometimes guilt. "After all we've done for you." Sometimes thinly veiled threats. "This will destroy our family." I held firm, repeating that I was honoring Grandpa's explicit wishes. He built this business, I would say. He had the right to decide its future. By the end of the first week, the calls had escalated to include extended family members I barely spoke to, all suddenly concerned about family harmony. "Your cousin Frank said you're being stubborn," my mother reported. "Even he thinks you should share." "Cousin Frank hasn't spoken to Grandpa in 15 years, I pointed out. "Why does his opinion matter now?" Then came the workplace ambush. I was cataloging a new acquisition at the museum where I worked part-time when Brian's wife Ashley stormed in, her face flushed with self-righteous anger. "How can you sleep at night?" she demanded loudly, drawing stares from visitors and my coworkers. "Taking food from your niece and nephew's mouths." "Ashley, this isn't the place," I said quietly, mortified as my boss appeared from her office with a concerned expression. "Where is the place then? You won't answer Brian's calls." She slammed her hand on the display case, making me wince for the delicate artifacts inside. "Our kids need braces. We might lose our house. But you're sitting on a gold mine because an old man got confused about who deserved what. Security had to escort her out, and I spent an uncomfortable half-hour explaining the situation to my boss, who was sympathetically bemused. Family estates bring out the worst in people, she said. My sisters didn't speak for 3 years over our mother's china set. The following weekend brought the ambush dinner. My mother called, her voice conciliatory. We've been too emotional. Let's have dinner Sunday and talk calmly like adults. Hoping for resolution, I agreed, only to arrive at my parents' house to find not just them and Brian, but also my father's brother Uncle Robert, my mother's sister Aunt Helen, and even our family pastor, Reverend Williams. What is this? I asked, pausing in the dining room doorway. We're concerned about you, Eleanor, Reverend Williams said, rising from his seat. Your family feels you're making choices that are hurting everyone, including yourself. It was a full-scale intervention, complete with prepared statements about my selfishness and inability to see the bigger picture. One by one, they took turns explaining why I should sign over at least half of the inheritance to Brian. This will kill your father, my mother declared dramatically when her turn came. The stress is affecting his heart. My father, on cue, placed his hand over his chest with a pained expression. Your grandfather wasn't in his right mind, she continued. You know how confused he was near the end. He amended his will 2 years ago, I reminded her, before any confusion started. Because you were filling his head with ideas, Brian accused. You've always been jealous of me. This is your way of finally coming out on top. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. We can contest the will, my father said, switching from health concerns to legal threats in an instant. We can prove undue influence. On what grounds? I asked. You were his caregiver. You had access and opportunity to manipulate him when he was vulnerable. The accusation stung worse than a slap. I took care of him because I loved him, I said, fighting back tears. Where were all of you? We had responsibilities, my mother snapped. Real jobs, children to raise. We couldn't spend every waking moment with him like you could. I worked full-time and still made time, I countered. Brian leaned across the table, his expression shifting from anger to an unsettling attempt at warmth. Look, Ellie, I know we haven't always been close, but we're family. We should be supporting each other. I've got some great plans for the shop space. We could turn it into a high-end landscaping showroom. I'd even keep some of the antiques as decoration. When I didn't immediately respond, his facade cracked. You've always been jealous of me, he hissed. Mom and Dad loved me more, and you couldn't stand it. Now you're getting your petty revenge. I stood up, unable to take any more. This dinner is over. If you walk out that door, my mother warned, don't expect to be welcomed back. I paused, the weight of her words sinking in. Are you disowning me over this? We're asking you to be part of this family, my father said. That means considering everyone's needs, not just your own. I looked around at the faces of my family, calculating, angry, manipulative, and made my choice. Grandpa was right about all of you, I said quietly and left. The next day, my cousin Megan called. Just so you know, Aunt Margaret is telling everyone you had Grandpa change his will while he was on heavy medication. She says you threatened to put him in a nursing home if he didn't. That's a lie, I gasped, shocked despite everything. I figured, Megan said. Just thought you should know what they're saying. Later that week, my mother's sister, Aunt Pamela, invited me to lunch. Unlike the others, Pamela had regularly visited Grandpa and had always treated me with genuine affection. They're not going to stop, she warned me over sandwiches at a cafe far from family haunts. Margaret has convinced herself that you somehow stole what was rightfully Brian's. She can't accept that her father saw, through Brian's charm, to the irresponsibility beneath. Did you know about the gambling? I asked. Pamela nodded grimly. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. They've remortgaged their house twice to cover his debts. Your father's insurance business is struggling because he keeps pulling out capital to bail Brian out. Why are they protecting him like this? Margaret couldn't have more children after Brian. He was her miracle baby. She's never been able to see his flaws. Pamela reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Be careful, Eleanor. They're desperate, and desperate people do terrible things. Taking her warning seriously, I consulted Natasha Kim, a lawyer friend from college who specialized in estate law. After reviewing the will and the circumstances, she reassured me.
The will is solid, she said.
Your grandfather had it properly witnessed, was of sound mind, and his reasons are clearly stated. They can contest it, but they'd be wasting their money. So I'm safe, I asked hopefully. Natasha's expression turned serious.
Legally, yes.
But family disputes like this rarely stay purely legal. Watch your back, Eleanor. Document everything. If they contact you, record it if you can. Keep a journal of all interactions. You think they'd do something illegal? I asked, alarmed. I think they've convinced themselves that you're the villain in this story, she said carefully. And people who believe they're righteous can justify almost anything. Her words would prove prophetic sooner than either of us expected. 2 weeks after the will was executed, I officially took over Timeless Treasures. The first day felt like a ceremony. I unlocked the door with my own key, no longer borrowing Grandpa's, turned on the lights, and breathed in the familiar scent of lemon oil and history. Sandra had agreed to stay on, her experience invaluable as I transitioned from helper to owner. Charles would be proud, she said, watching me carefully update the business license information. You're exactly who he wanted to carry this forward. I had plans, tasteful modernization of our inventory system, a website to showcase special pieces, maybe even small restoration workshops to share the skills Grandpa had taught me. The shop had always been profitable, but I saw ways to honor its history while ensuring its future. The first sign of trouble came when a scheduled appointment with an important estate liquidator didn't show up. When I called to reschedule, he seemed confused. I got a call saying the shop was closing, he said, that the owner's granddaughter was selling everything off. I am the owner's granddaughter, I explained, but I'm definitely not closing. Who called you? He couldn't remember a name, just that it was some guy. Later that week, our regular supplier of specialized restoration materials called to confirm the cancellation of our standing order. We didn't cancel anything, Sandra told him, frowning. We have an email right here, the supplier insisted. From the owner, Eleanor Reed. But I hadn't sent any such email. Someone was using my name. Then came the online attacks. Negative reviews appeared on our business pages overnight, complaints about rude service, accusations of selling reproductions as authentic pieces, claims of outrageous overcharging. The details were just plausible enough to sound genuine to strangers, but ridiculous to anyone who knew our business practices. These are coordinated, Sandra said, scrolling through the identical one-star ratings across multiple platforms. Look at the posting times. All within minutes of each other. I recognized some of the account names as friends of my parents or associates of Brian's landscaping business. Others were more carefully disguised, but the pattern was unmistakable. The virtual attacks were concerning enough, but then came the physical intrusions. I arrived one morning to find Joel Martinez, a vendor I'd worked with for years, looking uncomfortable on the sidewalk outside the shop. Is it true you're selling? He asked when he saw me. Absolutely not, I said. Why would you think that? Your brother came by my store yesterday, said you were liquidating, and wanted to offload inventory quietly before announcing the sale. He offered me first pick if I'd pay cash directly to him. Joel looked embarrassed. It seemed off, but he was very convincing. Brian has no authority here, I said firmly. If there were ever any changes, I'd tell you myself.
Joel nodded, relieved.
That's what I figured. But he had business cards with the shop's name and everything. Sure enough, Brian had created cards identifying himself as acquisition manager for Timeless Treasures, a position that didn't exist. The most brazen move came the following Tuesday. I returned from a quick lunch break to find my parents in the shop with a woman in a sharp suit who was photographing the space and making notes on a tablet. What's going on? I demanded. Eleanor, my mother said with forced brightness. This is Diane from Apex Commercial Realty. She's just assessing the property value. Without my knowledge or permission, I pointed out. This is private property. It's family property, my father countered. We're just exploring options. No, it's my property, I said firmly. And I'd like you all to leave now. Don't be difficult, my mother said. We're trying to be practical. If you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police to report trespassing, I said, pulling out my phone to show I meant it. They left, but my mother's parting words chilled me. This isn't over, Eleanor. Not by a long shot. That evening, doing a final inventory check before closing, I noticed discrepancies. Small but valuable items missing from where they should be. A Georgian silver snuff box. A Tiffany desk clock. A small Moorcroft vase. All portable. All worth between $1,000 and $3,000 each. I didn't sell any of those today, Sandra confirmed when I asked. A sick suspicion forming, I checked the security cameras Grandpa had installed years earlier. The footage showed my mother entering the shop using a key during our lunch break. While my father distracted the realtor with questions, my mother systematically went through the shop, slipping small valuables into her handbag. They still have keys, I realized aloud. Grandpa had given them emergency keys years ago, which they'd never returned. First thing the next morning, I called a locksmith to change all the locks. When he arrived, he looked confused. I already have a work order for this address, he said, checking his phone. Scheduled for this afternoon. Who placed that order? I asked. Thomas Reed, he read from the screen. My own father had scheduled a locksmith to change the locks, presumably to lock me out of my own business. I'm Eleanor Reed, the legal owner, I said, showing him the business license and my ID. And I need these locks changed immediately. The locksmith had just finished when my parents pulled up, their faces darkening when they saw the work already complete. What do you think you're doing? My father demanded, storming toward the door. Securing my property, I said calmly. Your keys no longer work, and you're not welcome here without an invitation. This is outrageous, my mother spluttered. We have every right. You have no rights here, I interrupted. And the security cameras caught you stealing yesterday. I have the footage. Instead of shame, my mother's face showed only calculation. You'll give in eventually, Eleanor. We're just speeding things up. This is criminal behavior, I said, hardly believing I was having this conversation with my own parents. If anything else goes missing, I'll file charges. My father scoffed. Against your own mother? Don't be ridiculous. But I could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew I had them on camera. Theft was harder to explain away than family disagreement. That night, I took Natasha's advice and invested in a comprehensive security system. Motion sensors, additional cameras, direct connection to a monitoring service. I hired Kevin, a former military police officer who now worked private security, to be present during business hours. Is the family situation getting worse? Natasha asked when I called to update her. They've escalated to theft, I told her. But with the new security measures, I think they'll back off. They're not stupid enough to risk actual charges. I had no idea then how wrong I was. Or how far my mother would go when cornered. If you've ever felt that familiar pressure to give in because that's what family does, drop a comment below. The next part of this story shows what happened when I refused to cave, and I'd love to hear how you've handled similar situations. Sometimes standing your ground means preparing for the storm that follows. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember checking the time as I fumbled for my phone, my heart already racing before I was fully awake. Something about middle-of-the-night calls triggers primal fear. Ms. Reed? This is Sentinel Security. Multiple alarms have been triggered at your business location. Police have been dispatched. Do you want to proceed to the premises? I'll be right there, I said, already pulling on clothes with the phone tucked between my ear and shoulder. The night was unnaturally quiet as I drove the familiar route downtown, punctuated only by the rhythmic thumping of my windshield wipers against a light spring rain. I kept telling myself it could be a false alarm, a power surge, a stray animal somehow getting inside, even ordinary burglars who would take a few items but leave the core of the business intact. Even from a block away, I knew it was worse than that. Red and blue lights pulsed against the historic brick buildings of Main Street. 2 police cruisers and an officer on foot with a flashlight checking the alley behind the shop. Officer Madison Thompson was the first to intercept me as I parked haphazardly and ran toward the building. "Ms. Reed, I'm going to need you to stay back for a moment," she said, her young face serious but kind. "We're still securing the scene." "How bad is it?" I asked. She hesitated. "It's extensive. We want to make sure whoever did this isn't still inside." 15 agonizing minutes later, Officer Jackson Chin gave the all-clear, and Madison escorted me to the front door, or what remained of it. The antique oak door that had welcomed customers for 40 years had been partially smashed, its beveled glass window completely shattered. But that was nothing compared to what waited inside. The devastation was methodical and comprehensive. Display cases lay toppled and broken. Antique furniture had been hacked and splintered. The careful arrangements of silver, porcelain, and crystal that had taken decades to curate were now just glittering shards ground into the hardwood floors. The walls, previously adorned with valuable artwork and mirrors, were defaced with spray-painted messages, "Family Traitor" and "Greedy Bitch" prominent among them. Most horrifying were the family photos and documents. Grandpa had maintained a special corner displaying our family history. Sepia photographs in ornate frames, framed letters and documents tracing our lineage back generations. These hadn't just been destroyed, they'd been desecrated. Photos had been burned, their charred remains scattered. Historical documents had been torn into confetti. A display case containing my great-grandmother's wedding dress had been doused with what smelled like red wine, the delicate lace now permanently stained and reeking of alcohol. I moved through the wreckage in a daze, my shoes crunching on broken glass and splintered wood. Everything of sentimental value had been specifically targeted. Everything Grandpa had most treasured had been deliberately ruined. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" Officer Madison asked gently, notebook ready. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I gestured to Kevin, who had arrived moments after I did, to access the security system's cloud storage on his tablet. The cameras had captured everything. The footage was clear despite the dim emergency lighting. My mother, clearly intoxicated, staggering through the shop with a hammer in one hand and a wine bottle in the other. My father following behind, not participating but not stopping her either. My mother's face contorted with rage as she smashed case after case, pausing occasionally to take swigs from the bottle. My father half-heartedly attempting to guide her out after the first few minutes of destruction, but giving up when she shrugged him off. The timestamp showed they'd been inside for nearly 40 minutes before the security company's call finally woke me. "That's Margaret and Thomas Reed," I said, my voice hollow. "My parents." Madison and Jackson exchanged a glance. "You want to press charges?" Jackson asked. His tone was neutral, but his expression was sympathetic. "No one envies the person who has to make that decision." "Yes," I said, the word barely audible even to my own ears. Then again, stronger. "Yes, I want to press charges." They took my formal statement as the forensics team arrived to document the damage. I moved mechanically through the process, identifying destroyed items, estimating values, explaining the security footage. A detached part of my brain noted the irony. I was finally putting to use all the inventory knowledge Grandpa had taught me, cataloging our treasures one last time. Not for sales or insurance, but for a criminal complaint against my own mother. I was still there when Brian arrived, storming past the police tape despite officers' warnings. "What have you done?" he shouted, his face contorted with the same rage I'd seen on my mother's face in the security footage. "I didn't do anything," I said, too emotionally exhausted to match his anger. "Mom did this. It's all on camera." "You're having her arrested?" he spat. "Your own mother? Over some junk." "This junk was our family history," I said. "Irreplaceable pieces that meant something to Grandpa."
To me.
"You brought this on yourself," Brian said, jabbing a finger toward my face until Officer Jackson stepped between us. "If you'd just been reasonable, none of this would have happened." Sir, you need to step back, Jackson warned. Brian ignored him. They're booking Mom right now. Dad called me from the police station. What kind of daughter does that to her own parents? What kind of parents do this to their daughter's inheritance? I countered, gesturing to the destruction around us. It was Officer Madison who made the discovery as she documented the damage to Grandpa's desk. In a drawer partially dislodged by the attack, she found a folder of loan documents I'd never seen before. Ms. Reed, are you aware of these? She asked, showing me papers with the shop's address listed as collateral. I scanned the documents, confused, then horrified. These are mine. I never took out any loans against the business. The papers revealed the awful truth. My parents had taken out multiple loans totaling over $200,000, using the shop as collateral. Loans they had no authority to secure. They'd been counting on inheriting the property or forcing me to sign it over, which would have made them responsible for the debts. Instead, they'd committed fraud. This is why they were so desperate, I realized aloud. They borrowed against an inheritance they didn't have. Brian had gone pale. Clearly, he hadn't known about this aspect of their plans. Is this connected to your gambling debts? I asked him directly. His shocked expression told me everything. How did you? Grandpa knew, I said. It's one of the reasons he left everything to me. He knew you'd sell it all to pay bookies. By noon, local news vans had arrived, drawn by police scanner reports of major vandalism at a historic downtown business. I declined interviews, but couldn't prevent them from filming the cleanup crews or reporting the basics. Family inheritance dispute turns violent as mother destroys daughter's antique shop. In the harsh light of day, surrounded by the ruins of Grandpa's life's work and hounded by curious neighbors and reporters, I felt a strange clarity emerging from my shock and grief. My mother hadn't just destroyed antiques, she destroyed any chance of reconciliation. She'd made her choice, and now I would make mine. I called Natasha from the small office in the back of the shop, the only area relatively untouched by the rampage. I need restraining orders, I said without preamble. Against all of them. And I want to press every possible charge. Are you sure? Natasha asked. This is your family we're talking about. I looked out through the office doorway at the devastation beyond. At the shattered remains of the grandfather clock where Grandpa had first taught me about gear mechanisms. At the splintered writing desk where I'd done homework while he handled the shop's accounts. At the ruined photographs that were our last visual links to ancestors long gone. No, I said firmly. They stopped being family when they did this. Now, they're just people who need to face consequences. The hearing for the restraining orders was scheduled for the following week at the county courthouse, an imposing limestone building that had always seemed like a backdrop to other people's dramas, never my own. Now I climbed its worn steps with Natasha beside me, acutely aware of the stares and whispers. Our case had become local news, the juicy details of wealthy family self-destruction too tempting for people to ignore. Remember, Natasha coached as we approached the courtroom. Stick to facts. Don't let emotion overtake your testimony, no matter what they say. Judge Hernandez doesn't respond well to family theatrics. My parents and Brian arrived with Gerald Hoffman, a flashy attorney known for billboard ads and aggressive tactics. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, but her expression remained defiant. My father looked diminished somehow, the confident insurance executive replaced by a hollow-eyed man who avoided my gaze. Brian alternated between glaring at me and whispering urgently to their lawyer. I expected accusations, but wasn't prepared for the sheer audacity of their claims. Your Honor, Hoffman began after preliminary statements, the Reeds are deeply concerned about their daughter's mental state. Eleanor has always been troubled, with a history of emotional instability that has worsened since her grandfather's death. Objection. Natasha called immediately. Counsel is making unsubstantiated claims about my client's mental health. Mr. Hoffman, Judge Hernandez warned, confine yourself to relevant facts. Hoffman nodded smoothly. The facts, Your Honor, are that Eleanor Reed has been increasingly paranoid, making wild accusations against family members who only want what's best for her. We have serious concerns that she may have staged the damage to her own business for attention and insurance fraud. The courtroom's shocked murmurs matched my own disbelief. That's a lie, I whispered to Natasha. They're desperate, she whispered back. Let me handle this. When it was our turn, Natasha was methodical. She presented the security footage showing my mother's rampage. She submitted the police report documenting over $200,000 in damage. She called Kevin to testify about the security system that had captured the events. But our most powerful evidence came in a thick binder Natasha had compiled. Years of text messages, emails, and documented incidents showing my family's pattern of favoritism and exploitation. There were texts from my mother to me. Why can't you be more like your brother? And Brian needs this opportunity more than you do. Emails where my parents had refused to attend my college graduation because it conflicted with Brian's baseball game. Financial records showing they had paid Brian's full graduate school tuition while refusing to help with my student loans. Documented incidents where family heirlooms meant for me had been redirected to Brian because he has a family to pass them to. This isn't about one incident of vandalism, Natasha explained to the judge. This is the culmination of a lifelong pattern where Eleanor's needs and rights have been sacrificed for her brothers. The destruction of the antique shop was simply their most extreme attempt yet to force her compliance. Then came the surprise witness, Walter Simmons, Grandpa's best friend for over 50 years, who had driven 3 hours to be there. Charles knew exactly what he was doing with his will. Walter testified, his voice wavering with age, but firm with conviction. He told me many times that Eleanor was the only one who cared about the shop's legacy. The others just saw dollar signs. Did Mr. Reed ever mention concerns about his family's financial behavior? Natasha asked. Walter nodded gravely. Charles caught Brian trying to sell some valuable pieces from the shop's inventory 3 years ago, without permission. When confronted, Brian claimed he was just borrowing the items and would replace them. Charles also discovered that Thomas and Margaret had been pressuring him to liquidate his collection to invest in Brian's landscaping business. He refused. When cross-examined about how he could be certain of these claims, Walter produced his own evidence, a journal Grandpa had apparently sent him for safekeeping. Charles wanted someone impartial to have this, Walter explained. He knew his family might try to suppress it if he left it in the shop. The journal detailed Grandpa's deliberate decision-making process regarding his will, his concerns about Brian's financial irresponsibility, and his parents' enabling behavior. Most damning were entries documenting previous attempts by my parents to access his money without his knowledge, including trying to have him declared incompetent 2 years earlier when he refused to fund another of Brian's business ventures. By the time testimony concluded, the mood in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Judge Hernandez granted the restraining orders against my parents and Brian, barring them from coming within 500 feet of me, the shop, or my residence. More significantly, my mother now faced criminal charges for destruction of property valued over $200,000, a felony that could result in prison time. My father was charged as an accessory, and both faced additional charges related to the fraudulent loans. Outside the courthouse, I was surprised to find a small crowd waiting, not just curious onlookers, but supporters. Regular customers from the shop. Fellow antique dealers I'd known for years. Friends from college. Museum colleagues. We're so sorry about the shop, Eleanor, said Mrs. Whitfield, an elderly customer who had bought her anniversary gifts from Grandpa for 40 years. But we know you'll rebuild it. We're here to help however we can. The outpouring continued in the following days. A local craftsman offered to repair what furniture could be saved at cost. A glass specialist volunteered to help with the broken display cases. The Historical Society organized volunteers to help document and preserve damaged documents and photographs. The most unexpected ally emerged a week after the hearing. I was sorting through insurance paperwork in my apartment when my doorbell rang. Ashley, Brian's wife, stood there looking nervous, her eyes darting to check if anyone had seen her. I shouldn't be here, she said immediately. Brian would lose his mind. But I needed to talk to you. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in, curious despite my wariness. Ashley sat perched on the edge of my couch, hands twisting anxiously in her lap. "I'm leaving him," she said without preamble. "I've wanted to for years, but never had the courage or the means. Now, with everything coming out in court," she took a deep breath. "I wanted you to know the truth. All of it." Over the next hour, she detailed Brian's gambling addiction, which was far worse than I'd imagined. He'd lost their house down payment, emptied their children's college funds, even pawned her engagement ring, replacing it with a cubic zirconia copy she wasn't supposed to notice. He'd been verbally abusive for years, his charm vanishing behind closed doors. "Your parents enabled everything," she said. "Margaret would pay his debts, then Thomas would lecture him, but nothing ever changed. They were counting on your grandfather's money as the final solution. When you inherited instead," she shook her head, "they convinced themselves you'd stolen their salvation." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it despite everything, "for what you've been through." "I should have spoken up sooner," she admitted, "but I was afraid. I'm still afraid, but the kids and I can't live like this anymore." Before she left, Ashley told me one more thing. My parents and Brian had made a final counteroffer through their lawyer. They would drop all objections to the restraining orders and admit full responsibility for the damage if I would give them $500,000 to make things right and agree never to press charges. "They really don't get it, do they?" I said, stunned by their audacity even now. "They never will," Ashley replied sadly. "In their world, everything has a price. Even family." I declined their offer through Natasha, who wasn't surprised. "Classic last-ditch effort," she said. "They're facing serious consequences and trying to buy their way out." Instead, I focused on what mattered, preserving what could be saved from the shop and deciding what came next. 6 months after the destruction, Timeless Treasures reopened its doors. The physical restoration had been challenging. Some pieces were damaged beyond repair, and others required specialized conservation techniques that tested even my trained hands. But the emotional rebuilding proved even more profound. I'd made the difficult decision to transform rather than merely restore. The front section of the shop now functioned as a small museum, displaying salvaged family artifacts alongside placards explaining their history and significance. Excerpts from Grandpa's journal, thoughtfully provided by Walter, offered insights into why he'd collected certain pieces and what they meant to our family narrative. The grand reopening drew a crowd that stretched down the block. The mayor cut a ceremonial ribbon. The Historical Society presented a plaque honoring the shop's contribution to preserving local heritage. Former customers became the first visitors to the museum section, many bringing their own stories of purchases made decades ago. "Charles would be over the moon," Walter said, misty-eyed as he surveyed the transformed space. "You've honored his legacy and created something new at the same time." Notably absent were my parents and Brian. After losing in court, they'd faced the full consequences of their actions. My mother received a suspended sentence conditional on completion of an alcohol treatment program and making financial restitution. My father's insurance business suffered irreparable damage from the negative publicity, forcing him to sell to a competitor. Brian filed for bankruptcy when his landscaping business collapsed under the weight of his debts and reputation damage. The family had fractured along clear lines. Some relatives, like Aunt Pamela, had stood firmly with me throughout. Others maintained that I should have kept family business private, regardless of what my parents had done. A few attempted to remain neutral, an increasingly uncomfortable position as the legal proceedings made the details impossible to ignore. "Family is complicated," Megan said when she visited the reopened shop. But what they did wasn't about family. It was about greed. I found unexpected healing in the rebuilding process. Each restored piece felt like reclaiming a bit of what had been taken. Each new customer who appreciated the history represented a step forward. And the addition of a small cafe area, managed by Ashley, who had followed through on leaving Brian and needed employment, brought new life to the space. The most unexpected discovery came 3 months after reopening. While reorganizing Grandpa's personal effects that had been stored in his home rather than the shop, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in his distinctive handwriting, dated just a week before he died. Inside was a letter I read with trembling hands. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then events have unfolded as I feared they might. I've been watching the currents in our family for years, seeing the entitlement grow in Brian and the enabling from your parents. I know they expect to use my legacy to solve problems of their own making. I'm sorry for the burden my decision may place on you. Wealth can be as much a curse as a blessing when others feel entitled to it. But I've watched you grow into a woman of principle and strength. You value things not for their price tag, but for their story and meaning. That's why it has to be you. There may be difficult days ahead. They may not understand or accept my choice. They may even lash out. But stand firm, Ellie. The shop isn't just a business. It's our family soul. In your hands, I know it will not just survive, but thrive. All my love. Grandpa Charles. His foresight was both comforting and heartbreaking. He'd known what might happen, but hoped for better from his family. In the end, his prediction had proven tragically accurate. The final insurance settlement exceeded expectations, allowing me to not only complete the renovations, but expand the business beyond Grandpa's original vision. I established the Charles Reed Scholarship for Historical Preservation, providing funds for students interested in conserving cultural heritage. The first recipient was a promising young woman specializing in textile conservation who helped restore what could be saved of my great-grandmother's wedding dress. On the one-year anniversary of the reopening, I hosted a special event celebrating not just the shop's rebirth, but the new family I'd found, a chosen family of friends, colleagues, and supporters who had stood by me through the darkest times. To honoring the past while embracing the future, I toasted, raising a glass in the cafe now filled with people who genuinely cared about me and the legacy I protected. That same week brought an unexpected letter from a rehabilitation facility in a neighboring state. My mother's handwriting, once confident and flowing, now appeared hesitant and smaller. Eleanor, words cannot undo what I've done. The program here teaches us to make amends, but some things may be beyond repair, like so many of the treasures I destroyed. My therapist says I should write without expectation of forgiveness or reconciliation, simply to acknowledge the truth. The truth is that I was wrong. Wrong to favor Brian so blatantly all these years. Wrong to enable his worst tendencies. Wrong to expect your grandfather to bail us out. Wrong to punish you for being exactly the person Charles saw, someone worthy of his trust. I don't expect to be welcome in your life again. But I wanted you to know that in my sobriety, I see clearly now what I was too blind to see before. You were never the problem. We were. With regret. Margaret. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk. Not rejected, not immediately embraced, but acknowledged as a possible first step on a very long road. Forgiveness might or might not come with time. For now, it was enough to know that truth had finally penetrated the family mythology. As I closed the shop that evening, I paused by the portrait of Grandpa that now hung in the museum section. We'd found it in his home, undamaged by the shop destruction. His eyes seemed to twinkle with the same wisdom and kindness I remembered. You were right, I told him softly. About everything. The journey had cost me the family I thought I had, but revealed the strength I never knew I possessed. In losing what others valued, money, status, superficial family harmony, I'd preserved something far more precious, integrity, purpose, and the true legacy my grandfather entrusted to me. Not a legacy of mere objects, but of stories, of values, of knowing what truly matters and having the courage to protect it, no matter the cost. As I look back on this painful chapter that ultimately led to new beginnings, I wonder about your experiences with family justice and karmic resolution. Has standing your ground against family pressure ever led to unexpected positive changes in your life? I found that losing what I thought was family allowed me to build something more authentic and meaningful. Share your story in the comments. Each one reminds us we're not alone in these difficult journeys. If this story resonated with you, Please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to join our community of people supporting each other through family challenges. And if you know someone facing similar pressure to sacrifice their own well-being for family harmony, share this with them as a reminder that sometimes the hardest boundaries create the healthiest futures. Thank you for witnessing my journey from devastation to rebuilding. Whatever family challenges you're facing, remember that sometimes the ending of one chapter creates space for something better than you ever imagined possible.